Hello, welcome. Today I wanted to do a bit of an odd video. Let me know if you like it because I'm just experimenting with things. I wanted to go through a bunch of my comics and I went through all of my comics and I found one page that I thought was a good example of composition and one that was a bad example of composition. So one for each of my many comics that I've done. And I wanted to sit down and break down why I find them good and why I find them bad. Like, what are the good qualities? What are the negative qualities? Because I've been trying to make a video discussing comic book flow, how pages flow together, and I just haven't been able to do it just by rambling. So I thought I could open things up. So yeah, with I wanted to start with Sovereign, which was my very first comic, and this is a page of Sovereign that I hate. I have hated this page for a long time. It doesn't suffer from a lot of the same issues that a lot of Sovereign pages suffer from. One of the main issues being Sovereign tends to have a thing where we draw the background color for everything. Like, this is the same background color, this is the same background, this is the same background, this here same background, which creates kind of so compositionally it creates this thing where visually this all gets blocked together, and this is just not a strong composition. Everything kind of blends together and becomes very flat and boring. This page is a little better because you have the negative space sections, here, you think about it like this. So it breaks it up a lot, which is good, but I find the flow on this page to just kind of be atrocious. So let me pick a nice bright orange, I guess. So the flow is kind of how you follow things visually throughout a page, and it's something I wanted to discuss, where this is a line of action, right? There's physical objects that kind of create that line, and I don't think this specific line is that bad because it does flow into this panel, but what happens on this page is you have this is a line of action that's being created, and then this one also is there. And though the action line follows kind of here in this panel and then here in this panel, and it creates this weird effect, I find, where it feels like everything is drawing inward towards this point here. And I find that very disjointing. It's very awkward to look at, and it makes it hard to kind of just follow the action in general. There's also a bit of a 180 rule, I think, that's being broken here, where this panel is Percy, so this character facing this way, and then it flips him to this way, and I find that's very disorienting. And generally speaking, I just find it hard to figure out what's going on. I like this panel. I feel like the story that's being told in these panels is kind of fun and easy to follow, but this suffers from every single problem because you have these two competing here, and you have this line, which is fine, and then you have this purple background on everything. So it just becomes very flat and boring, and that's my big issue with this page. From the same scene, we have this page, which I think does a much better job. So typically, your speech bubbles will draw a lot of attention, and you kind of have the Rael is looking here, but you have the ship here that's kind of pointing this way. We're drawn to this image. We got her boobies and stuff that are pointing down that way, and I find that the rule of thirds is kind of nice in it. I guess it is a little bit halved. There's this that blocks things off, and it just creates a nice line that moves here. And then we follow down to Elias, so we get to see him here. And he is kind of pointing us in this direction to see like what's happening with these characters. And there's like the nice line of the ship that leads you nice into here. Like the line of the ship, Elias's eye line, the line of the ship, everything just swoops nicely and brings to this panel where we can see the main ship coming up here. And then we got this that's creating like a nice like block effect going on. That's why I like this page. Everything is shaped to kind of like flow you through the reading experience of the page and like experience it very there's a very like clear line, and all sorts of elements are leading to it, as opposed to a whole bunch of elements like conflicting with it. It still has a bit of the orange thing, or a bit of the purple sky thing going on, which is a bit of an issue, but it's a lot less prevalent than in a lot of our early comics like this. Like you have the purple and then the brown and the purple and the brown, which is fine because sometimes you are going to be just showing the background a few times. And it's nice that only a third of it is covered, which is in line with a very important rule, the rule of thirds. So it creates like this section, and then there's just a more unique panel happening here where we're seeing like a top-down view of the situation. And that's why I like that page. That's why I find that it is strong compositionally. Moving on to Pretty Mouth, I hate this page. Here is like a perfect example of where all of it is blue. All of the background is blue. When this was originally in black and white, it was all just very white. And especially with Evan, when you think of him not being all colored in, it was just like blue background, blue background, blue background, blue background. And it's the glass of a bus shelter that they're in. And there's not really a good reason for them to repeatedly have this same background. Another issue is that if we look at Evan here, we have that Evan, and this Evan. And aside from like expressions and stuff, they kind of take up the same amount of space. They're placed pretty similarly. They just feel very repetitive on top of there being like this blue background that is the same. So we have the same Evan in the same blue background. We have the same Evan here. We have the same Evan here. And from a storytelling perspective, it's very difficult to tell what's going on. We got Rizzo here. He's hiding from the sun. Evan grabs his shirt. He's supposed to be like considering giving his shirt to Rizzo, but I don't think that comes across. And then he looks at Rizzo and then he harumps. Generally speaking, I find this page very redundant in the terms of like the narrative too. And even looking from like a perspective of flow, we kind of, you can usually get away with like one panel after the other being read. But even that, like, there's kind of like a downward motion happening here. There is a nice kind of swoop that happens here, and I think there's a swoop there where he's looking back at Rizzo. It's not perfect. I don't think it's the worst. I think with it's more of an issue of just repetitiveness and just repetition in the background, repetition in the characters being drawn, and yeah, just repetition in general. And that's why I find the composition very weak, and the entire page is just kind of boring and flat to look at. Moving on to our good picture. This is more like a fun page. I didn't want to include too many like fun pages because like they are like, you know, they're just peak. Okay, like it's hard to compete, and I just didn't want to do fully them. I love these kind of pages because like you get to move with the goo. The goo creates kind of like this effect. And then we have Evan who's looking back here. And we have a nice swoop. I just like it. I think there's issues with it. It's kind of hard to find a perfect pretty mouth page. Like this feels a little off. Now I'm just gonna nitpick the good one. That one feels a bit off. It feels like it could be more centered maybe and bring these. But I do like that there's like the small them going on. We got the Evan react, and then we have like an action. So like though these are repetitive in like character and size, like they are adding new information, which is good. But like there's just like nice movement caused by like the wave here, I think, because we have like the Evan. He's a little tucked into the corner. But I like the use of like the monster goo guy to like bring everything through the page, and that's why I really like how this page turned out. I think there's even better examples later, but I didn't want to like nitpick through things. That's my opinion on that one. My next one I wanted to look at is NPoint. So here we have kind of the similar thing with the Evan problem, where like in this case it's her being stacked is not working because it weights it weird. So we have him pointing over to her, which is good, and she's pouting. And I find what happens is because she's pouting and she's stacked on top of herself, it creates this interest zone here where like this isn't a focal point. It feels like in a better version of this, it should lead from her to this focal, and then we should move forward into this. But because there's this stack of her creating like this big draw, this big weight to the page, it all pulls over to her. So like it should be like this is a big focal point, this pulls out here, and then this panel here, I find just in general it's hard to follow. Because this page is supposed to represent like this character here. She's deaf, so like these are supposed to be like empty bubbles. So I think part of what's happening on this page is because we're used to bubbles being draw points for readers, we're using them as if the readers will actually go here. But the readers don't really care about an empty bubble in the same way as they do about bubbles with text. So in a preferred version, it would, like I said, this was a point of interest. This would go to her, and then we would sweep down here in some way. But there's not that. So instead, the action is kind of like this, because we're following the line of the table. Maybe we're going to here, maybe we're going to here, maybe we're going to here. It's very competitive about what the focus is. So I think like the composition is pulling in this way. And it's hard to say, like, because we're going from here, so like there's no natural way to enter this panel. We're kind of, when the reader's looking at this panel, they're just kind of taking it in as whole and kind of going like this. And you want your reader to more like follow a more general eye line that's like not full of like breaking points, whereas this is like a break, and then we look at this and just kind of take it in at whole. Whereas you want to lean into it more. I really like this page. So moving on to this one, we have a nice introduction page. I wanted to show that. So it's the entrance point. It's like a nice intro point. It's got a lot of leading action, lots of interest. I guess it pulls out if you think about it, because that's the problem with like following actions lines is they move inward or outward depending on like how you're looking at them. So I think you can use it to kind of like, it pulls you in, you look at what's going on, and then you move out from it, like that. And then I like the story that it tells, because like when I was saying that you don't want to like break panels like that, that's not always the case. Sometimes you want to do like a purpose break or cut, I think. Whereas like when I was starting out in comics, I always thought that you needed to like always have this nice curve that brings you through every panel and every page. But I think it's okay to like bring you through a panel, break, and then move on through other panels. Having a break in the flow creates a feeling almost like a cut that happens. So in the case of this, I do think the page looks nice because it has that nice like thing that I'm talking about, and then it breaks, and we are moved into like this area, and it also has that same kind of outer facingness, whereas this one then kind of pulls inward towards Penny. And I think that's just like a really nice establishing shot, because I think this outward pulling feeling that all of these panels has creates like this openness that is really nice to have in an establishing shot, because it's really inviting you to like focus in a bit here based on like the fact that there's these elements here that are all creating a framing for this character. But it's also just inviting you to explore the scene. You know, we've got this nice line here, and we've got this nice blocking out, and it just creates like a nice interesting thing to look at in general. And the same thing kind of happens here, where we're focused more on him, and then we have these characters that create like that heightening of the perspective of the page. And then we have like him blocked out here. Everything's kind of framing Penny. It's a nice like this. And yeah, that's what I like about this page. That's how I feel it's strong compositionally. Moving on to the Magpie. So the Magpie is a sequel to Pretty Mouth. And this, again, like, I think you might notice what I don't like about this page. It is this... Oh, this orange is awful. What would go good on top of this? Like a green? Yeah, green would stand out. So, what do we have? We have the same background color repeated. It is a swath of this. And one thing that happens in Magpie a lot is things like the lines of the walls happen. So like the wall line here and the wall line here, and they create this weird illusion, especially in black and white, where the panel ends repeatedly, and it's not good. It creates a lot of disjointedness. There's lots of lines that are just kind of flat and boring and going down and interrupting the page panel ends, because they're always happening around the panel end edges. And it's even like this one isn't as bad because there's kind of that flow here, but then there's this one, then there's this one. I find this one is hard because the continuity of movement is strange, because we have Amanda here, we have Margie here, and then suddenly Margie is here and Amanda is there. And that's obviously, like, if you think about it, it's because Amanda has moved past her and is now in a different area of the house, because there's the cabinets there, but it doesn't work really well. I find it very confusing what happens in these two panels. And now thinking about it from a motion standpoint, we have this panel that's like pulling everything in, which is fine because we can have that kind of in-out thing, which is okay. Like, I don't think the panel is unworkable, but it's also kind of like establishing and weird. Then we have her hanging up her coat. And you know, when I talked about how animators like to repeatedly do things, what is the purpose of this panel? Okay, she's already putting up the coat in this panel. So like, why don't we just get rid of this, expand this one out, give it the space it needs, and the whole story that needs to be told is told. The same thing kind of happens here, where like this story could be told in one panel, or it could be told in two. Another thing that's happening here is we have this exact thing and this exact thing. So that is okay if you're kind of creating a staccato type thing. So like maybe you have like a panel where like a character is like this, and then in the next panel they're the exact same, and then they're like that. So these are telling different things that happened very close together, so that's why they look the same. But in this case, a lot has happened between these two panels, you know? A lot of time has ticked past between them. Amanda has moved all the way over this way, and Margie has fallen behind her because she's going so fast. But Amanda looks exactly the same in these two panels. It's the same weight, the same kind of pose, and yeah, that's kind of the issue there. And then we have this huge like flip around that happens at the end, and the flow, like ignoring this, because this creates kind of a break. Like, I guess it has like a bit of a flow that goes this way. So we have her going this way, and then we have the motion continues that way. We have motion that's going inward here. And then we have motion that's this way. So we have this whole page here that just wants us to go into this corner. Like everything is directing us here. Like all the motion just wants us here, and nothing is bringing us here, where there's kind of a nice swoop going on. It's a very halved by the thing. It almost creates like the illusion of this being another panel, which interrupts the movement even further. And Amanda's kind of just shoved into the corner here. So this is just like a bad page, composition wise. And moving on to like a nice page, I wanted to show an example of an exchange of dialogue, because dialogue is where a lot of the issues can come, where like the background's all the same. So here we have like a nice blue or white, depending on if we're looking black and white background. Then we have like a nice swoop that's happening here. We've got a little taste of like what the actual background looks like, and then we got like another nice framing panel. So like all of the background work is different. So when you visually look at the entire page, everything looks just like very nice, and it flows together in a way that's very like appealing. Whereas like in previous pages we looked at, it's just kind of a swath of one color. So that's something that's working very strong. So obviously we have like a lot of motion here. So we're looking at her, and then that's moving us. She's moving us to this bubbles. So these bubbles, and we can move down from her arm, which moves us to this bubble here, which moves us to here. She's looking down. Her nose is pointing all the way into this one. There's like a bit of a framing that's kind of, I think, pulling this way. It's just kind of how it's weighted. So everything's going here. Trixie is pointing outward into this panel, which brings us here. So I feel like this page has just a very strong flow. Another thing is if we're looking at Trixie, we're looking at this Trixie, we're looking at this Trixie, there's all sorts of different like angles, different like intensities. So like she's talking generally here, so we're kind of pulled out in a mid shot. And then there's like a more intense panel where she's talking about like, you know, what happened to her mother. So we bring in for a close up to like heighten the intensity of the page. And then we pull out as she's talking more about the group dynamics. We're bringing Tammy back into the story so we can bring her into like a close up here. So I just like narratively how the composition works here, as well as generally where the whole page is just very pretty. The whole page is just very pretty to look at. And I think that really works well. There's kind of the swoop coming out here too. You notice like what I was saying about things pulling towards this way is there's a lot of like black space here. So when you think about the page, it's creating like more of a this thing, and with Trixie pointing, it's bringing here into this swoop. Like this whole section is bringing it outward to that way. Same with this, emphasizing her downward face turn and her nose and all of that pointing to the next panel. And also like you can follow like the curve of her hand directly from this into like this page. So everything like just pulls into the next page, and I think it just does a really good job of that. Next I'm looking at Books of Avo. So I finally want to look at Books of Avo. Books of Avo, I actually found it very difficult to find panels and compositions I didn't like, because Books of Avo is very simplistic. We don't overthink it. there is kind of like the boring thing that happens in the backgrounds with all of them kind of being the same, but that's kind of just the nature of the game. It's very simplistic. I don't think this page looks entirely bad. I just found it kind of pulls this way. And I think if we just moved Juliet to the side or something like that, moved her over here and had it move that way, and then move this bubble over here, we could create the flow that we want. But Avo is worked on so quickly that it doesn't matter tons. That's kind of the deal with working with vertical comics. You don't have to worry about that as much. Like, the pages still work because usually when someone's reading it, they're looking at this panel and then they're looking at this panel. Because it's a vertical scroll comic, but I wanted to bring it in because it is a comic that I work on. And finally, I wanted to show a good one, because this is more like interior panel flow, because this is how, like I said, it's a vertical comic. And also it's a good composition because Lul is in it. Always include Lul, he is the best boy. But it just does well, because like you read this block, brings you here, moves to him. He's got like his arms, his attention drawn here, and there's just like this nice swoop. It all brings you over here, and I just think it does a very good job of that. Yeah, so I hope that was interesting for y'all. Let me know if you want me to dig into more pages and or if there's anything in here that I talked about that you'd be interested in. Other than that, thank you for listening. I'll see you guys in the next one, and make sure to check out the Discord. And if you want me to do this to your comics, you have to become a patron, because we do this once a month. We will dig into other people's comics than my own. And just don't forget him. He's the best boy. I love him. All right, goodbye.